For more than half a century, humanity has been orbiting, but not truly exploring. We built stations in space. We sent probes farther than imagination. We photographed black holes. We mapped the edges of the solar system. But we did not go back. For 53 years, no human being left low Earth orbit, not once. An entire era passed where space became routine, almost predictable. We circled Earth again and again, repeating the same patterns, refining the same systems, operating within a boundary that felt vast, but was, in truth, incredibly small. Because low Earth orbit is not deep space. It is still Earth, protected by its magnetic field, connected by constant communication, close enough that rescue, in theory, is possible. Beyond that boundary, everything changes. And for more than 5 decades, we stayed inside it, until now. 4 astronauts sit inside a spacecraft unlike anything Apollo ever flew. Reed Wiseman, Victor Glover, Christina Koch, Jeremy Hansen. 4 human beings strapped into a capsule, riding a column of fire into the sky, leaving behind not just Earth, but the limits humanity quietly accepted. This is Artemis II, and it is not a return, it is a reset. Because Artemis II is not about repeating history, it is about continuing something we abandoned. Apollo proved that humans could reach the moon. Artemis is asking a harder question. What happens after that? Inside Orion, everything feels familiar, and completely different at the same time. At first glance, it is still a capsule, still a metal shell, still a fragile bubble of air surrounded by an environment that cannot support life for even a second. That fundamental problem has not changed since 1968. Humans still need air, water, temperature control, radiation protection, a way to slow down, a way to survive landing. That has never changed. What has changed is everything else. Apollo's command module gave 3 astronauts about 210 cubic feet of space. Imagine that for a second. 3 grown adults, sealed inside a space roughly the size of a large closet. For days, eating, sleeping, working, existing. No escape, no privacy, no separation. Just bodies, equipment, and the constant awareness that you are surrounded by vacuum. That was Apollo. Orion expands that space to about 330 cubic feet. That does not sound dramatic. It is not luxury. It is not comfort. It is still tight, still restrictive, still claustrophobic. But in deep space, small differences become massive. Because when you are 250,000 miles from Earth, the margin between manageable and unbearable is measured in inches. That extra volume changes how the crew moves, how they rest, how they function, and more importantly, how they endure. But space is not the biggest difference. Human dignity is. Apollo astronauts did something most people today would find almost unimaginable. They used plastic bags, adhesive bags, attached directly to their bodies, used in front of each other, stored inside the cabin afterward, for the rest of the mission. No separation, no privacy, no escape from it. Many Apollo astronauts later described this as one of the worst parts of spaceflight. Not the danger, not the launch, not the void, that. Orion changes that completely. For the first time in deep space, astronauts have a dedicated hygiene area, doors that close, systems that separate waste, processes that resemble what we use on the International Space Station. Privacy. It sounds like a small improvement. It is not. It is a signal. A signal that spaceflight is no longer about pure survival. It is about sustainability. Because Artemis is not designed for a single mission, it is designed for what comes next. And that becomes even more clear when you look at the human body. Apollo astronauts did not exercise in space. There was no room, no equipment. NASA made a decision. Missions were short, so physical degradation was acceptable. Muscle loss, bone density reduction, weakness after landing, a cost worth paying. Artemis refuses that logic. Inside Orion, the crew trains every day, 30 minutes. A device weighing about 30 pounds, roughly the size of a carry-on suitcase. It uses a flywheel system, generating resistance based on effort, up to 400 pounds. Astronauts can row, squat, deadlift in zero gravity, on their way to the moon. That single detail tells you everything about how space exploration has changed. Apollo was about getting there. Artemis is about staying capable once you do, because Mars is not a 2-week mission. And then there is the rocket. Apollo rode the Saturn V, a machine so powerful it redefined engineering at the time. 7.5 million pounds of thrust, raw force, unmatched. It was not just a rocket, it was a statement. Artemis II launches on the Space Launch System. 8.8 million pounds of thrust, more powerful, more advanced, but built with a different mindset, because today, power alone is not enough. Saturn V and SLS share something important. They are expendable, they fly once, and they are gone. In an era where companies land boosters back on Earth, that almost feels outdated. But SLS was not built to be efficient. It was built to be reliable, to send Orion and its crew toward the moon in a single launch. No assembly, no refueling, no complexity, just one decision, and then commitment. But the real difference is not the rocket, it is the spacecraft riding on top. Apollo ran on fuel cells, hydrogen and oxygen combining to create electricity and water. Elegant, efficient, but limited. Every watt used meant less remaining. Every system ran on borrowed time. Apollo crews lived with a countdown, always aware that resources were running out. Orion changes that. After reaching space, it unfolds solar arrays. Large panels covered in photovoltaic cells, turning sunlight into electricity, constantly, continuously. As long as the sun exists, power regenerates. That changes everything, not physically, psychologically. Apollo lived under scarcity. Orion operates with margin. Systems can run longer, harder, with more redundancy, because the power source does not disappear. And then, quietly, another transformation appears. One that has nothing to do with engineering, and everything to do with how humanity sees itself. Apollo was American, entirely, from design to execution. It was born out of competition, a race, a statement of dominance. Artemis is something else. The Orion service module was built in Europe, provided by the European Space Agency. A Canadian astronaut sits on board because of an agreement signed in 2020. Future missions will depend on infrastructure built by multiple nations. The moon is no longer something to win, it is something to share. This makes Artemis slower, more complex, more political, but also more realistic, because the next step is not just going, it is staying. And staying requires something Apollo never had, a system larger than one nation. Inside Orion, behind the panels, the difference becomes almost overwhelming. Apollo's computers had about 72 kilobytes of memory. Think about that. Your phone uses more than that to load a single image. Orion's computers are roughly 20,000 times faster. 4 independent systems running in parallel. Digital interfaces, real-time navigation, software-driven control. Apollo's cockpit was physical. Switches, dials, gauges, astronauts reading numbers manually. Mission control doing most of the calculations. Orion is digital, screens, automation, systems that can adjust trajectory in real time. And most importantly, Orion can fly itself. It proved that on Artemis II, an uncrewed mission. Fully autonomous. Launching, orbiting the moon, returning to Earth. Without a human pilot. But Artemis II is not about removing humans. It is about redefining their role. The crew is actively piloting the spacecraft in deep space, testing control systems, evaluating response, understanding how the vehicle behaves under human input, because in the future, there will be no one to help them. A signal to the moon takes seconds, to Mars, up to 20 minutes. In an emergency, that delay makes Earth useless. And so Artemis is preparing for something Apollo never needed. Independence. Communication itself has changed just as dramatically. Apollo used radio. It worked, but it was slow, limited, fragile. Orion uses laser communication, infrared light, massive data transfer, high-resolution images sent back to Earth in near real time. Apollo returned megabytes, Artemis sends gigabytes. In days, the distance between Earth and space is shrinking. Not physically, but emotionally. And then, there is what they see. Apollo flew low over the moon, about 70 miles above the surface. Close enough to see detail, texture, movement of shadows. Artemis stays far out, over 4,000 miles away. And from that distance, something changes. The entire moon, visible at once, pole to pole, filling the window. No Apollo astronaut ever saw that view. And beyond that, something no human has ever seen directly. The Oriental Basin, a massive impact crater. Hundreds of miles wide, mapped by machines, never seen by human eyes until now. And then, something even rarer. An eclipse, not from Earth, but from behind the moon. The Earth itself passing in front of the sun, a thin blue crescent blocking the light. Imagine that moment. You are behind the moon, floating in silence, watching your entire home planet eclipse the sun. No Apollo crew experienced that. The geometry never aligned. Artemis does. And as the mission continues, the crew moves farther than any human ever has, beyond Apollo 13. That record was never meant to be broken. It happened because something went wrong. Artemis will break it on purpose, because what was once emergency trajectory is now design. And then comes the hardest part. Reentry. Orion will hit Earth's atmosphere at around 25,000 miles per hour, faster than any human has ever returned. The heat shield will face temperatures near 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Plasma will surround the capsule. Communication will cut off. For those minutes, they are alone. No signal, no voice, no help. Just 4 people, inside a shell, trusting engineering, and even that trust carries weight. Because Artemis I revealed flaws, unexpected erosion, heat shield behavior that did not match predictions. Engineers argued, debated. Some wanted delays, redesigns. NASA moved forward anyway, because exploration is never perfect, never safe, only calculated. And every astronaut accepts that. The crew itself represents another change. Victor Glover, first person of color to go beyond low Earth orbit. Christina Koch, first woman. Jeremy Hansen, first non-American. Apollo crews did not look like humanity. Artemis begins to. And while all of this unfolds, something quieter is happening. Data, radiation exposure, sleep cycles, cardiovascular stress. The human body is being studied in deep space in ways Apollo never could. Because this mission is not just about the moon, it is about Mars. That is the real destination. Artemis II is not the end. It is the beginning. Apollo proved we could leave Earth. Artemis is asking something harder. Can we stay away? And yet, after all the technology, all the progress, all the change, one thing remains exactly the same. When Orion passes behind the moon, the signal disappears. For about 40 minutes, there is nothing. No voice, no data, no connection, just 4 humans, floating in darkness, farther from home than anyone in history. Apollo astronauts knew that silence. Artemis astronauts will know it too. Technology cannot remove it. Progress cannot soften it, because space is still space. Empty, silent, unforgiving. And for those 40 minutes, Artemis II will remind us of something no machine can change. We are still alone out there. That silence is the same. Everything else has changed.